National. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Paula Arrow. I'm the chairperson of the National PHN Mental Health Lived Experience Engagement Network. I want to just welcome you all today. Before we formally hand over to the fabulous Auntie Vicky McKenna, just a couple of housekeeping items. So the meeting is being recorded, so just to let you know that. If individuals would like closed captioning, they can do that on their device. The webinar today will go just for a little bit over an hour, so we'll provide just a little bit of background and introduction to the launch, and then we'll be hearing from the fabulous lived experience leaders that have been involved in the suite of projects that we've been involved in. While there's not a lot of time for questions and answers at the end, we will keep a track of these and we will do our best to have some time at the end for questions and answers, but we'll also have a contact point to follow up with any questions and answers. Firstly, so I'd just like to a big welcome and a big shout out to Auntie Vicky McKenna, who without Auntie Vicky McKenna, and also I just really would like to note, I feel like I'm missing an arm today with not having my co-chair here, Kerry Hawkins, who was the co-chair for the projects and was the representative from the National Mental Health Consumer Carer Forum. So Vicky, I'd like to hand it over to you to acknowledge this beautiful country.
Mabaguragari, Ngaya Nelawal Vicky McKenna, Nyambaguria Rangan, Yaro, Irvunaba Nganjando. Jalin Nana Yan, Pudia Yaro Nganburu. Nanijan Nguru, Nalalangan, Ganga Junuburu. Ganajan Yiri. Nangaga Jamilia, Nanga Junugon, Australia Gon. Nariganel Bugadi Garangudan, Darajan Buru Mangra. So, good morning, everyone. As my beautiful sister has said, Paula, my name is Vicky McKenna. I'm the head of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Lived Experience Centre at Black Dog Institute. This morning, I come to you as a very proud Yarro and Bonobo woman from the West Kimberley in Western Australia. I acknowledge that I'm on Yarro country this morning, the land of my people. I acknowledge all of the other traditional tribal lands on which we all meet today from around Australia. I recognize Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders' continuing connection to and their care of the lands, water, sea, and sky since time immemorial, and pay respects to all of my own people, past, present, and of course our emerging leaders, not necessarily all young, and to all other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples at this launch, joining us for this launch. I acknowledge that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are from the dream time, forever and always. Thank you.
What a beautiful acknowledgement. Thank you, Sis. And I too would like to acknowledge the country, the beautiful country I'm on today, the Yagara and Turrbal people north of the Brisbane River. I'd also like to pay my respects to any First Nations people that are attending this launch today and welcome you and thank you for this beautiful country. Next slide, please. So I don't know if other people have black rectangles on top of the slides or if it's just me. Yeah, so Vicky, the centre's also done some really fabulous work in terms of digging into this term around lived experience. And, you know, we obviously today want to pay our recognise and pay our respects also to those giants whose shoulders that we stand upon, and the wonderful people that chip away at the lived experience and consumer carer movement over the decades and today, and also the young people we're seeing emerging as leaders. But I think it's really special to understand what lived experience means to First Nations country. And I was just wondering if you could share a bit about the work that you've done at the centre, which has guided our thinking and our learnings and understanding about the importance of the definitions that relate to First Nations people.
Okay, thanks, Paula. The centre at the start of the commencement of the work in establishing the centre, Leilani Darwin did a lot of work in terms of developing or finding ways and engaging with community, consulting with community, and doing workshops to develop a definition for lived experience for First Nations people. And you'll see at the left of the screen, as you look into it, is our definition. And I'll just read that, and I'll just add a little bit to that. So the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander lived experience working definition: a lived experience recognizes the effects of ongoing negative historical impacts and or specific events on the social and emotional well-being of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. It encompasses the cultural, spiritual, physical, emotional, and mental well-being of the individual, family, and community. People with lived or living experience of suicide are those who have experienced suicidal thoughts, survived a suicide attempt, cared for someone through a suicidal crisis, being bereaved by suicide, or having a loved one who has died by suicide, acknowledging that this experience is significantly different and takes into consideration Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's ways of understanding social and emotional well-being. So this statement, or the definition of this, really acknowledges that we have a greater exposure to trauma and psychological distress and risk to our mental health, which are impacts of colonization. It's significantly different because of the concept of us addressing the person as a whole, encompassing also their community, their family, and everything that's connected to them. And Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people's ways of understanding. So this is intentionally broad because these ways will differ across the country. Geographically, and other factors such as gender and age will have an impact on when you're reading the statement. So it will have a different, it may be read differently or suit in another way. We also kept in mind too that more than likely in the future that there could easily be some changes to this. But right now, this is absolutely perfect. It reflects Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people's emotional well-being.
Thank you, Vicky. Vicky says, and all of the wealth of learnings about culture that you do continue to bring not only to these projects but to MHLEEN. I've just popped a couple of the definitions of lived experience leaders down the bottom here and what lived experience leadership means. And once again, I would like to acknowledge Kerry Hawkins, who is the epitome of a person who connects their personal, professional and socio-political worlds in unique ways to lead change, linking local experience with organisational and systems change endeavours. And they operate within and outside of roles, organisations and settings. And this piece of work, I think it's important to share a little bit of the background and thinking. So I might just ask if you could move on to the next slide, please. So just in terms of background, I see a few of our MHLEENers that have signed up. So g'day to you all out there. So for those who don't know, the MHLEEN actually stands for the National PHN Mental Health Lived Experience Engagement Network, and it was established in 2018. And I chair the network, and what our aims are with this network is to work with the 31 PHNs around Australia in terms of embedding lived experience engagement in their commissioning and regional planning work, to promote and build the lived experience workforce, and to provide connection and network and sharing of resources and tools. And, you know, I'm particularly passionate about this, having living experience with not only mental health, but suicidality and alcohol and other drugs. And when I started back with the PHN back in 2016, PHNs had very little skin in the game. They were, you know, kind of played with partners in recovery, and that was about it. But from second half of 2016, the federal government actually handed over responsibility for the commissioning of primary mental health, suicide prevention, alcohol and other drug services. So we've gone from being quite a small fish in the sea to really having skin in the game. And the creation of MHLEEN has been a commitment, and, you know, from the Department of Health and from PHN CEOs for us to work towards, you know, ensuring, you know, people with a lived experience are leading this change. I'd just like to invite Heather just to share a bit about the National Mental Health Consumer and Carer Forum for us. So Heather Nowak, who is here in place of Kerry Hawkins. Heather.
Hi, thanks, Paula. I'd also like to acknowledge that I'm coming from the lands of the Paramount people. So the National Consumer Carer Forum is a combined national voice for mental health consumers and carers. We're funded by the Australian government and state and territory governments. The forum members sort of represent mental health consumers and carers on a large number of national bodies, including government committees and advisory groups, professional bodies and other consultative forums and events. And members use their lived experience, understanding of the mental health system and communication skills to sort of advocate and promote the issues and concerns of consumers and carers. And the forum's been around since about 2002 when it was formed, so it's been here for a little while. I'd also like to take the opportunity, Paula, to acknowledge the work that Kerry's done in this. She's been, you know, part of the initiating and also driving, but also chairing the project. It's been many hours of meetings and many hours of work behind the scenes, and just want to acknowledge all the work that she's done to get to this point.
Yeah, I concur. Thank you, Heather. Next slide, please. And it's interesting, oh, the one before, sorry. It's interesting the little thought bubbles for a reason, because it was during the COVID time, I think 2020, and just happened to be having a conversation, having a yarn with Kerry over, I don't know if it was a Zoom or a Teams chat, and it was a bit about, what are you doing? What are you doing? How are you doing that? How are you doing that? What are you trying to achieve? And literally, from that conversation and subsequent conversations, we found just a real meeting of the minds in terms of what MHLEEN was trying to achieve and what the forum was trying to achieve. And both we're looking to make some, you know, a high level systemic strategic transformational change. And so these little thought bubbles started to grow, you know, further develop. And some of the stuff we identified is there's lots of other big organizations and networks and peaks. They're all grappling with these three key areas as well. You know, where do we find all of the evidence base? Where's the one go-to place to find, you know, lived experience leadership stuff and the evidence base required for commissioning? What's happening in the training and the, you know, the emerging lived experience workforce? Bits and pieces of stuff were being done all over the place. And probably most importantly, how do we get to a point of true partnership true co-production and authentic engagement. So exploring all of that, along with inviting Kerry along to one of our, I think a couple of our MHLEEN meetings, just to share her insights and thinking, I think was how it kicked off. So if you move to the next slide, please. Yeah, so, and the other part of this, we also agreed that the process was just as important as the outcome, because we'd seen a lot of the C word being floated around in everything we were reading, and then seeing what actually transpired in terms of the C word. So we, you know, the fabulous work of people like Kath Roper and Indigo Daya had come up with some, you know, lived experience led thinking and conceptualizing about what co-production really does mean. And so we stayed true as we could to you know, this lived experience definition of co-production, and looked at, you know, so what are we looking to solve? Who should we involve? What approaches should we use? Timeframes, funding, governance, and all of that. So, you know, we took it back to our respective groups and had discussions, and agreed that we'd kick off by, you know, developing a memorandum of understanding, you know, how we wanted to work together genuinely and authentically in partnership. We each wanted to chip in 50, you know, as a 50-50 all the way, including money in kind and also governance of the group. And if we just move to the next slide, please. And so what we did was we established, you know, project governance and partnership with the project. So, you know, Kerry, Sis, Vicky, my auntie Vicky, and myself kind of did a fair bit of behind the scenes talking and discussing. We wanted to bring on some lived experience consultants to do the work, and we also wanted to have some good you know, partnership in terms of project steering groups. So we create, so we had with the digital library, our tender process, we did a select tender. So the project steering group identified a number of consultants that they'd worked with, knew of, were credible in the industry, and we did a tender process via that, and then the project steering groups, you know, reviewed the tenders. So Alida Meadows, the fabulous Alida, was successful, and is going to share a little bit about the co-design of this incredible piece of work, this digital library, which is we've got, you know, the starts of everything in one place. And then Ellie Hodges and her team from the Lived Experience Leadership and Advocacy Network, or LELN, picked up on the training scoping paper and the governance framework and toolkit. I'll let them explain in a bit more detail. The training scoping paper we did actually complete earlier in the year, but the governance framework and toolkit, we realised that to do this right, we needed to really spend a bit of time. We're in the midst of a, you know, change of government, you know, national partnership agreements, bilateral agreements, rethinking the governance more broadly. And so we really did want to dig a bit deeper and have some really practical toolkits. So next slide, please. And so today's launch is about the project, the process and the projects. And I'll just hand it over to Heather just to quickly give an overview of each of the projects. And then we'll invite a leader to kick off with the first one.
Thanks, Paula. I won't go into too much detail because obviously we've got Ellie and Alida who are going to explain these in much more detail. I wasn't actually part of the governance framework, so I'll get you, Paula, to talk a little bit about that. But the Lived Experience Digital Library is exactly what it seems. It's a library and it's a central repository of consumer and carer leadership related knowledge and initiatives. It's got a wealth of useful resources, including articles written by people with lived experience, along with generated by non-government organisations. It's inclusive of clinical and non-clinical based articles, and it's got research papers, links to websites, visual and diagrammatic material and guidelines and much more. So it's really, really exciting to be able to access all these things in one place. And the library is really to provide access to a wealth of information to assist people with lived experience in their leadership, and it will be publicly available.
Terrific.
Do you want to chat about the governance framework, Paula?
Oh, I'm going to leave that to Ellie, but I do just want to highlight the framework, the thinking behind it has been amazing, and I've learnt so much through the process of, you know, us sitting down at focus groups, at our annual MHLEEN meetings, talking about, well, what does it really mean and all of that. But after seeing the development of the toolkits, I was just thinking, oh my gosh, this is really some stuff we can work with to hopefully get some rethinking even broader around good governance, with the mental health, suicide prevention and AOD sector. And I think I'll leave it at that to let Ellie explain it. But at the end, we will talk a little bit about next steps. And
thanks. And Ellie's going to have a lot of explaining to do, I think, isn't she? And just a little introduction around the training scoping paper. So it proposes a model of what's required to enable a progressive, viable and sustainable lived experience peer workforces to further develop and thrive in Australia. Wouldn't that be amazing?
Yeah.
It contains a number of recommendations for improving existing training options, career opportunities and support structures to strengthen the lived experience peer workforces. And it also sort of highlights that there's going to be quite a lot of advocacy and collective effort required at a jurisdictional and federal level if we're going to be able to realise this process. But this is an awesome start to looking at what's out there and where we need to go.
And just before this launch, we had one of our colleagues at the health department say, can we use it yet? Can we use it yet? Because it's a great, for me, the depth of scoping within this paper moves beyond just the typical old Cert 4 mental health peer work stuff. There's an audit of all available things from, you first starting out wanting to get involved right up to university, tertiary level programs that are available. It talks about career pathways, and it's actually it's going to be a very useful document. And I know that the Department of Health are already wanting to look at the recommendations that are contained in that report. So without further ado, I would like to welcome the fabulous, most patient Alida Meadows. I say that because you've had the project. I remember the project steering group first couple of meetings, and I was wondering if Alida was going to run a mile, but somehow you managed to get us all in and work with it. So off you go. Hand it over to you.
Thank you, Paula. Thank you very much. I just want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the traditional lands of the Muwinina people of Nipaluna, which is Hobart, part of the Palawa Nation of Litruwita, Tasmania. I find that really funny because, first of all, my first career was as a librarian, which evolved into reference librarian, which evolved into something I continue to do, which is being an historian. So bibliographies are second nature to me, and I'm not sure that you'd be really interested in me giving you all the details of the process of building a bibliography. It could be quite dry. But I think in the limited time that I have, the most important part of the work that we did was work as a team with the steering committee. And I know that what you said was quite funny, Paula, but in fact, it was a blessing to me to work with such committed and people with so many good ideas. And even if we had to talk through a lot of things that I thought were givens, I realised that you know, my point of view wasn't the most important thing. What was most important was to put together a library, a digital library that reflected the notions, ideas, and strategies and, you know, of people with lived experience. So I want to thank Vicky McKenna, Bella Burns, Carly Shears, Eileen McDonald, Tina Tran, Lauren Keys, Maggie Blunt, and of course Tim Heffernan, and of course you, Paula, Kerry Hawkins, and Danica from MHCT. You absolutely contributed, and a large part of this work is due to you. Now, what we had to go through was actually quite, it seems simple. We put together bibliographies under certain headings. They were all to do with leadership, including co-design, co-production, research, etc. But it wasn't so simple. There were issues like, I'm not going to go through every issue, but some examples. So we looked at Lynn Mahboob's, Lynn's here, hi Lynn, her concept of medical siloing. And we did have that kind of discussion about not having to use the medical model or giving that precedence. And in fact, some people felt we should exclude that altogether. But we felt that in the end, we came to the conclusion that it was important to have that there as something against which we could measure the work of people with a lived experience. So it was about having the full breadth of knowledge, but we weren't going to prioritise those sort of clinical articles, those academic articles, but we were going to include those that we felt were legitimately important to have in our collection of resources. So we talked through that, and that took a little while. So that was also about what the implications, we had to consider what are the implications of not including a document or a piece of work in the clearinghouse. We know that there's a lot of different agendas and everyone's agenda is legitimate. So it's not like we were preferencing anyone in particular, but we knew that there would be people who felt very strongly about things that maybe don't appear in the digital library. But we have a portal for them to suggest something that they feel should be there. And all those things that you put forward will be considered. We've also put together some criteria for what will be included. And that was another thing. How far back do we go? We couldn't go back to year zero, but we didn't want to exclude seminal works, things that had been produced before the period that we started collecting from, which is, I think, 2017. So we do in each of those bibliographies have a section for seminal works, for works that actually laid the groundwork for what was to come, for further discussion. And those are really important. And if people have more of those, please put them forward. There are, in fact, we did have this discussion. What about all those articles? Because there are many articles on the web and in databases, or the places that I search, that you can only access by paying for them or by being a member of an academic library or an organisational library that pays for that database. In the end, we decided to include them, and they're you know, in the bibliographies we absolutely state whether something is freely available or can't be made available except through purchase or through someone else. But we do tell people that they can access them if they have a friend who's doing a university course, or they maybe know someone who knows someone. And I did a lot of that work when I was working at Mental Health Council of Tasmania. I did a lot of that. I just went through the people that I worked with who were at uni and got them to organise articles for me. But the other thing is that maybe that's an area that needs to be lobbied for, advocated for, that people with lived experience who can't afford, but who are advocates who can't afford to pay for these databases, who aren't going to university, might be given access to these articles. So that might be something that the Forum on MHLEEN might like to take up and put forward. The other thing that was really important was acknowledging what is called priority groups within all the government documents. What I call them are the most marginalised groups, and who are not being heard properly. I mean, the reason First Nations people are being heard is that they have set up their own infrastructures and they work really hard to make sure they're heard. But even so, when we're building these kinds of resources, we need to have their input front and centre, CALD input, LGBTIQ input. We included young people, older people. We have a whole series of different subsets of resources within each bibliography. And if anyone feels that we need to do more, you can let us know. The thing is that each of the bibliographies have the same headings, and we've arranged all the information under similar headings across the whole spectrum of bibliographies. But there's always room for improvement. I feel that once you have a look at it, and we're going to have a demonstration after I finish this long-winded chat, you'll see that it's working really well. It's quite exciting. There's a really good search process. We've got different places where you can find out what does copyright mean, what do different we didn't make our own glossary because that would have taken a lot of time, and there are so many really good ones. So we chose one and a couple, and you can click on that and go to that to find out the meaning of different terms that are used in these, especially the clinical and academic articles. They use terminology that not everyone might understand. And that was another thing. We decided that we would include things that seemed a little bit more esoteric or obfuscatory or difficult, because we didn't want to patronise people. If you don't understand what you're reading, you find it difficult to read, you can go to something else. There's like a plethora. There's a spectrum of different kinds of things, or you can talk to other people about it in MHLEEN or in MHCT or with other consumers and carers. But we didn't want to tell you, oh, you can't understand this, so we're leaving it out. We felt that was too patronising. And in the end, we decided we'll go with things if they seem relevant.
I think too.
Okay, sorry.
I was just going to say too, Alida, it's obviously a work in progress, and we will be looking at ways to keeping it up to date and really encouraging people that are
feedback,
evaluations and reports and things like that, just to, there's an option on there, I think, to submit things. And I can tell you now, I've been going down so many rabbit holes with this website. So should we flip over and just show the video? I'm just conscious.
I think so. And thank you all for the opportunity. I loved it.
Thank you, Alida, and the steering group. So is this our video? No one's seen it yet, so let's.
A collaboration between the National Mental Health Consumer and Carer Forum, the Forum, and the National Primary Health Network Mental Health Lived Experience Engagement Network, MHLEEN. The Lived Experience Leadership Digital Library, or the Library, is a central repository of mental health, consumer and carer leadership related knowledge and initiatives. It strives to focus on work by those with lived experience, but also includes work generated by non-government organisations and academic and clinical and/or biomedical documents to shed light on the role of systems and their readiness to recognise and provide support for those with lived experience to become leaders of change. You can find out more by going to the Library tab and clicking on About. The library was co-designed by the Forum and MHLEEN consumers and carers, along with key input from the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Lived Experience Centre. If you hover over Browse Library, you will see that there are 5 categories for you to choose from: Lived Experience Leadership, Engagement and Participation, Co-Design and Co-Production, Lived Experience Workforce, and Lived Experience Research. Each of these categories has a number of subcategories for ease of use. So let's have a look at one of the subcategories here. Let's look at Engagement and Participation, Seminal Work. Click the link and you will see it holds a list of resources including articles, websites, podcasts and videos. You can then click the link and it takes you to that resource. This is going to save you a lot of time and energy finding resources on these topics. Let's have a bit closer look at what information is provided about articles or documents. First you will see the article title, then some information about the authors, then information about whether or not you will have to pay for the article, and you can read more of the abstract by clicking the Read More link. Let's take a look at Tools, Guidelines and Frameworks. When you click through, you will see we are in the Engagement Participation subject area, and listed are some frameworks like Minds Participation and a Co-Design Practice Framework, Lived Experience Framework from New South Wales, and Mental Health Lived Experience Engagement Framework from Victoria. There is a full repertoire of information on a broad range of topics for you to browse. This curated library of information will make finding information on these topics super quick and easy, all found in that one place. If you want to search for something specific, you click on the Search tab. This takes you to a page with a search function. You can search your criteria and you will see that it brings up a full list of all references to that criteria across all 5 categories. We're always keen to receive feedback and suggestions on possible inclusions into the library. Please bear in mind these 3 points when considering submitting feedback. Then simply complete the form and we will review your feedback and suggestions. Finally, there are a couple of sub-menus underneath the Library Information tab. These include About, which we've already explored, Language, which addresses the language used in the website and has links to a glossary, Access Options references how articles may require payment, Referencing describes our method of referencing on the site, and finally, a copyright notice. That concludes our exploration of the website. Special thanks to all of the consumers and carers for their collaborative work in putting together this really useful digital library of resources that will serve the lived experience and broader mental health community. Thank you.
And thank you, Hayley, for putting together this video. Just while we're on links, I also do just want to give Dr. Louise Burns' Lived Experience Leadership, or if anyone knows the actual link, if they could pop it in the chat, but another great website with all of the lived experience workforce research, I think, which is referenced on here. So thank you, Hayley, for your clever technology and video making. Now, I'd just like to warmly welcome Ellie and thank her team. Ellie's just been kicking goals left, right and centre in the lived experience leadership and advocacy space, and we were so fortunate to be able to get Leland on board for these other complementary projects around the scoping of training and the governance framework and toolkit. So handball to you, Ellie.
Thank you, Paula. And I want to thank the National Mental Health Consumer and Carer Forum and MHLEEN, the Mental Health Lived Experience Engagement Network with PHNs, who contracted Leland to do these 2 pieces of work. It's been quite a journey of 18 months since our first conversations, and the projects continue to evolve and go with where the co-design and co-production took us, which has been really exciting to actually be funded to do a piece of work when you can take the time that's required to get the better output at the end that we need, just because it's such an emergent space. So for these 2, talking about the scoping paper and the governance framework and toolkit, I've actually just cut images and information direct out of these resources, just as a beautiful intro to people, because we don't have a lot of time here. And I know that you'll go searching and with the URLs that are being shared and be able to do your own exploration. So this is like not even a taste, like a bite, it's like a lick size of what you're getting from me right now. So if we can go to the next slide would be awesome. I know that Paula and Vicky at the start talked about definitions. It's been really critical through both pieces of work to be explicit in what we mean by lived experience. So both resources give our sector a go-to place. And the National Peer Workforce Guidelines provided that when they came out as well, but we've needed to, there's a lot of contestation and dispute around, and we wanted clarity. So both of them provide that. And if we go to the next slide, the scoping paper, and we'll skip that tile slide actually. The scoping paper was really about looking at a training needs analysis to scope what is out there and what is needed, and trying to have a higher level budget. Over time, a lot of this information is hidden, or some people didn't want it publicly shared. So the scope changed a little in agreement with the steering group, and to be looking at more the pathways and developments and wraparound supports to ensure that the lived experience peer workforce can be progressive, viable and sustainable into the future. And so that's what we have offered. And the next slide will speak to how lived experience has been centered, the insights and contributions of people that we connected with. And the document has quotes directly from people that provided their input. And the next slide tells us about something to really remember is we actually delivered this paper at the end of last year. And when it was coming up to publication, we know that a lot more has been added into this public sphere. And so it's remembering that the point in time it was written, and in 6 months, so much has changed. And in the next 6 months, there's more things come out that I know are being worked on. So it's remembering those considerations around it. But the high level model that we'll get to in a couple of slides is still relevant, and is actually the advocacy point that the Forum and MHLEEN can advocate for and broadly in our sector. The next slide is a very quick summary of how we came to put this paper together. So it was reviewing a lot of training and programs that exist already, structured interviews, spotlighting pieces of work, looking at the policy context. We had online roundtables, an environmental scan of over 259 training programs. So it's very intense. The next slide shows what we heard from talking to people through those interviews and the reviews. We heard about the current experience of the lived experience peer workforces and the challenges they experience. But then we wanted to imagine the ideal future, because that's what we're designing for. Leland's position is that advocacy that just highlights problems and doesn't offer solutions, or to put our hand out to be part of the partnership to make things better, it's shit advocacy. And so it was important that through these documents, we provide solutions and a path forward, because that's what we need to do together and collectively. And the next slide is really the model that the training scoping paper offers up. The the beautiful interlocking flower type image on the left, which says that for a viable, sustainable, progressive lived experience peer workforces into the future, we need lived experience as endorsed and invested in as a critical workforce. We need tiered training options and visible career pathways. We need a professional body to provide advocacy at national level, separate to the two peaks that are currently emerging and being formed. This is around workforce, which has different needs than systems advocacy and everyone having a voice. So really need to make that caveat very strong. And it's also around workplace supports that enable safe, effective and thriving lived experience peer workforces. So some of the really key things is how we define scope of practice for peer work. That is, if there was a recommendation of work to be done, that is key to so many areas, and the recognition of it as a technical skill set in its own right as well. And the image on the right-hand side are the pathways that can exist, is because we know that there are diverse roles and diverse settings where the lived experience peer workforces operate. And so training needs and ways to support people into them and remain in them or progress through them are required. And the next slide is a summation at the end of the scoping paper that the Forum and MHLEEN are in unique positions to lead the conversation and work in partnership with others. And this is because I know lots of people on this call are doing work as well. That model provides a frame for all of us to be advocating and trying to infiltrate and progress things for lived experience peer workforces. And it will be iterative and knowing that co-design continues and co-creation. It doesn't just stop now that this document has been delivered. And if we go on to the next slide and we speak to the lived experience governance framework. So the first slide of this we'll talk to, the next one is that I remember the first conversation was about, we're actually thinking we need a bit of a toolkit so that the system and sector can partner and understand lived experience better. Over time, and because of Leland's experience of trying to bring alternatives to suicide, which is a challenge to clinical governance and how it trumps everything, actually talking with our partners, the Forum and MHLEEN and MHA, about we actually need more of a framework right now because of the narrative and rationale and to give it strength. And so we were able to expand the scope of this piece of work and actually focus more on the framework with a toolkit as well. And so that's what we have done. This piece of work had over 200 people input into it. So people with lived experience in designated roles, non-designated roles, people who did not have lived experience, or they may but not disclosed, and they don't come or work from that lens, but with governance experience or high-level executive and policy involvement across the sector. We heard really strongly, and we can go to the next slide, that what we actually need in this space is one governance framework and approach, which is practice-based, aligned with human rights and self-determination. What we heard unanimously was that the system is not currently ready for that, and we actually do need to put up a lived experience governance framework as separate to, and to build strength and exposure that way. And so that is what we have done. It is across settings. It is about meaningfully embedding lived experience. It's accounting for different settings, sectors and structures, policies, practice, the whole gamut. In writing this, my team and Anna Leditsky, who has been heavily involved from Leland, but also others within this, writing such a document with the audience we're trying to have is, we had to keep hammering the point, I guess, because we didn't want it just to be about the care, treatment level. This is about systems-wide change, decision-making, and not just in service delivery context. It's about policy and complete disruption was the aim. And so we had to keep checking ourselves in our language as well. And the next slide just talks about more of that. So next slide again. The definition of lived experience governance, I will just say this as it is, because I know lots of people have been wondering, what is this thing? Lived experience governance intentionally embeds organisational cultures and systems that give primacy to centering or being led by lived experience perspectives, principles, and ways of working in the decision-making, oversight, and evaluation of systems, structures, policies, processes, practices, programs, and services. And the next slide will show us where it fits. This is not a challenge to other parts of governance. It's an add-in to good corporate governance that should be occurring anyway, that just very much centres people. So you can see where that fit is. The next slide. Within this document, we knew we had to not veer away from confronting the challenge and some of the dilemmas in this space, and that one of the biggest shifts to moving more aligned with lived experience governance will be changing relationship and approach around risk and creating more space for it and sitting with the tension of that. And that will be a huge development area for our sector. And not just mental health, it's all the social sectors that this all aligns and has relevance for as well. And the next slide has for us more talking about those, and that We also didn't shy away from talking about harms of current approaches, because it's important to do that, and that the harm of current approaches are often unrecognised, under-assessed, and not spoken about or safeguarded. And that's why building in accountability and talking to accountability has been important for this framework. And the next slide talks about safety cultures. And then the next slide, I think we're getting to, so ta-da, here is the actual lived experience governance model. So in the centre is centering self, people, identity, and human rights. And my team and I, we had some beautiful support from Vicky and her team at the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Lived Experience Centre. Is we always knew culture went somewhere around lived experience governance, but we didn't want to centre it or have it as a component. But then when we kept hearing people, person, rights, self-determination, agency, humanity, personhood, we brought it into the centre to embed it there, because we can't not do that if we are honouring what people tell us in the lived experience community and our First Nations communities and others. And we were very cautious not to co-opt or steal, because it's not that, it's honouring that social and emotional well-being. There's so much to be learnt from that rich, expansive understanding. And so that's what we've tried to do here as well. Around the outside in the purple text, the restorative, just and accountable organisational cultures, the lived experience values, principles, ethic, positionality. If you do the 5 things in the middle without those 2, you are not doing lived experience governance. So just because the language in the middle of the partnership, co-production, safeguarding, responsibility and power, lived experience involvement, expertise and leadership, transformative workforces and practices, innovation and continuous improvement, language we see out there already, you may go tick, 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 tick for those 5 things, but if you don't have the wraparound or the centering, it's not lived experience governance. And so the next slide is an image of what success looks like. We wanted to tell people, do this well, this is what it will be. And then I know I'm really racing through, but time is of the essence, and I know you can go and delve and explore and have some fun. The next slide, we start to move into the toolkit. So the toolkit has 5 tools or resources, and I've got some screenshots to go through here. Each of these will be able to be downloaded individually or as a collective. So the first one is around exploring mindsets. For transformational systems change, it's our mental models and the way we think about things that has to change the most. So aligned with each of the values and principles of the lived experience governance model, which we have aligned with the National Peer Workforce Guidelines from the Commission, because through all of our interviews and think tanks, they were validated and what kept emerging. And so we just have gone with them to leverage it. And because it's a huge piece of work that was also done in our country recently. And then we looked at the mindsets that are aligned and not aligned for people to think about. The next slide is, I guess, the biggest tool that we have is aligned to the 5 domains of lived experience governance, is an audit tool. So people can tick and flick and rate themselves, and then they can do a summary and get an output and think about what they can do better. And so down the bottom left is a table where they can look at their results of whether they are achieving them or not. And the next slide within the audit and action planning tool, there's an action planning template where people can set goals. And these are fillable PDFs to make it a bit easier for people so that it's usable, where you can do that, assign responsibilities, set some timeframes, and hopefully get things being done better. The next slide has the, at the end of the audit and action planning toolkit, within the framework there, we talk about the enablers and accountabilities around this stuff. And so there's action plans linked to those as well for people. And then the next slide has our next tool. It was really important within the governance framework and the toolkit. So you'll see that they're highly aligned, lots of copy and paste of information across. So we wanted action. We don't just want to talk about change. And so within that, we also had to think about who are the people and roles that have responsibility and key influence in this space. And we did really reflect about language, and you'll notice that the person at the centre, sometimes called consumer or service user or whatever, we actually went with a really radical idea of person, because at the end of the day, we're people and that's what people wanted. You'll also note we have used carers, family, kin, and other supporters of choice. And that's because we hear from people that not everyone has a carer that is in the family or a close relationship, that they are supporters of choice, that may be because there's an exchange of funding or through a different type of connection. And so we've gone with that language. And the next slide has the tool linked to roles and responsibilities, where for each of those groups around, including funders, commissioners, there's this reflection tool where you can think about how that role is aligned with the 5 domains of governance and what you can do to strengthen it. The next slide has, so within the toolkit, we've actually looked at some of the really core resources out in the world and done a matrix of how they cover off on the core components of lived experience governance, and that's pages long, but we wanted people to be able to go to source yourself. And the next slide is one last one, which is, we know that there already are national safety and quality standards plus NDIS standards. We matched our domains across those to show that this actually isn't new and radical. You're meant to be doing this anyway, and this is how it ticks off those things. And I thank all of my team that have put up with the demands of this, and thank our commissioning partners and everyone that contributed. It's been a really huge piece of work that we're immensely proud of. Thank you.
And thank you, Ellie, and your team. Great work, and likewise to Alida. And Vicky, you and I were we caught up, was it earlier this week, and we were talking about how excited we are to have this this work, but this isn't just a piece of work and then bye-bye, there we go. We're already plotting and scheming around stage 2 and what needs, what some of the things that Vicky and her centre and her thinking is for next steps. I'm thinking about the PHN land, and we're now in the process of renewing regional plans, which require governance processes. So the timing to pilot and test some of these tools is prime. Vicky, what some of the stuff that you've in relation to this and next steps, particularly for your centre and First Nation people. We were talking the other day about the rollout of some of the the training and the workforce development stuff, and what you're seeing and hearing there. Oh, you're on mute, Vicky.
It's been really interesting for us at the Lived Experience Centre. Right at this time, we're currently in a partnership with the West Australian Mental Health Commission. So as part of that partnership, we are developing the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peer workforce guide. And this really is following what Alice just shared about the scoping paper and the governance framework. This aligns really well. It's really well to what we would like to see happen, because the work that we're doing on this guide really responds to a lot of the whole of those areas, specialized areas for the governance framework to work well. So this is really exciting. It's specifically for Western Australia. However, I think other states could easily access this this guide and use it. There's been a lot of consideration, a lot of work being put into it. It's been pulled together by our national network members, and also some additional Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people from around Australia who are experts in the space of training and development. So that's just one of the the many pieces of work that we're currently working on. that will contribute to, and I think they're all foundational for lived experience, and you know, equally important for First Nations people. Yeah.
Implementing.
Yes.
My favorite word. And likewise, you know, in PHN land, and we're very fortunate to have Auntie Vicky and the centre a member on MHLEEN, but I would like to just acknowledge the fabulous work. I know I saw Linda Watts and the Victorian and Tassie lived experience workforce group down there that are working fabulously together, you know, with the state government. And so in terms of this work, one of our newer deliverables moving forward is that contributing to, you know, better state and territory, you know, relationships and, you know, coordination between PHNs and, you know, state governments and those sorts of things. So down in Vic and Tasmania, they're doing some great work down there. Up here in Queensland with the lived experience workforce stuff, this scoping paper is going to be a kickstart. We won't be starting from scratch, where we've got all of the Queensland PHNs that are co-contributing to develop a statewide lived experience workforce implementation plan. So we've got lots of, and also in our progress report to the department, we've got specific, you know, what's next and recommendations to act on these. So, you know, I could go on for ages, but, you know, watch this space. We will have, so this will be recorded. I understand the link to the recording. Some people couldn't hear the video, will be sent out. We will also post the MHLEEN email address, and we do have now, we're expanding, we have a lived experience advocacy delegates or lead group that is an independent advisory group to MHLEEN, and they're made up of people who work with their local PHNs and or, you know, have a special interest in primary mental health services. So shortly we'll just be adding that link. So if you'd like to go on the mailing list and stay involved in, you know, state and national developments in this lived experience leadership space, you know, we'll encourage you to sign up to that. I see we're after time. I'm just looking for one of our fabulous Mental Health Australia people. I know that there's been something like, gosh knows how many comments come through. So
I think we're probably not going to have time for
Okay.
Q&A. Sorry, Paula, just jumping in for Q&A. But what we can do, as you said, is we can both share our email addresses. And as you've said, there'll be opportunities for this to kind of expand going forward. So, yeah.
Just one other thing I did. Oh, sorry, I did forget to. Oh, sorry. Yep.
Can I just quickly say, look, big thank you and congratulations to Paula and Kerry Hawkins, who are magnificent leaders in the space of lived experience. They are truly wonderful people to work with. It's been an absolute pleasure, but I also want to acknowledge the wonderful work that everyone on the committees have, on the steering groups have contributed to this wonderful work. So thank you.
Thank you, Vicky. And I was doing so well with not getting teary. But yeah, thank you, yeah, to everyone involved. And you know, this just one other thing I forgot to mention, which is probably of interest, is in terms of the governance stuff, you know, there's lots in there. But our next steps with that are to roll out a series of targeted webinars to unpack, you know, these toolkits and how they might be used with different cohorts. So, you know, we're already talking to the Department of Health about, you know, running some webinars with them. We're going to be hitting up PHN CEOs, our lived experience leaders out there and those sorts of things. So, you know, there'll be a bit of a promotion trail going on, particularly over this next 6 months. So anyone who wants to get involved, yeah, just please email us. You know, our group has grown, and you know, the journey is open to anyone else who'd like to come along for the ride. I certainly, it ain't stopping now. We've got some momentum. So thank you everyone who took the time out today to really appreciate you know, your great response. Thank you all for coming along, and please feel free to share the info widely, and I'll say good afternoon.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ellie. Thank you, Lita.
Thank you. Thank you, Vicky.
Yeah, no worries.
Bye. Thank you, Ellie. Lovely
Thanks, Ellie.
work.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody.